we're covering today and introducing myself. I'm going to go a little bit slow just in case there's another few people joining us. All lines have been placed on mute for the moment. If you would like to ask any questions, feel free to use the chat or question feature. And feel free to ask as we're going along. I will try to look at these occasionally and answer questions. If there's anything I missed, I will get back to it at the end, for sure. And I will be recording the session, and these sessions will be available on the Reba Exchange as well, just so that you are aware. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and jump into the demonstration portion. As this is a mostly demonstration-based session, and we'll be covering several different advanced topics across the Ariba sourcing module. What I'm going to be doing is creating within the sourcing site, this is a demonstration site, we're creating a quick project which is an RFP template which has various features enabled. We'll be looking at some of these advanced features and how they function. So I'm going to go ahead and name this. Okay. I'm going to choose an RFP template. I'm going to mark it as test for our purposes, and let me just verify one quick thing here. I have made some changes to the templates. I want to be sure that these are available as needed. Okay. Okay. Going back to creating my advanced features webinar. I'm selecting RFP so that I get the RFP templates to show up. And there's a number of templates. What I am actually going to be focusing on today is this template here, which has been set up to show various features, because not all features are actually enabled by default. Okay? And we'll go through some of the rules section here, because the features need to be enabled in the rules section in order to be visible for us to use in the content section, and also for suppliers to be able to use them as well. Okay. The first two sections, envelope rules, timing rules, is not applicable at this point in time, as this is fairly straightforward. The envelope feature is something that is very rarely used. You can read about it here, which is basically, it would be approaching usage of the sourcing content by determining which suppliers' responses from one section allow them to move forward to the next section. It's a very specific, mostly government usage type of feature. So if you don't see this in your template as enabled, that's okay. It's not very frequently used. Again, if you don't see some of these features as being enabled, or you say, well, this webinar showed features that I don't see when I normally create an RFP, it's because they weren't enabled in the template. These are all features that are available for Sourcing Pro. It just depends on whether they are turned on to be visible or delegated or not. Okay. We're going to focus on the bidding rules and a little bit on the market feedback. Okay. The scoring on participant responses. This is a feature that's classified a little bit as advanced, but it's a feature that we go into in detail in a separate webinar session, so I won't be touching on that today. Okay. Scoring, grading, not something I will be talking about today. However, I will be talking about creating alternate responses, creating alternate pricing, bundles, and tiers. Okay. Basically, these features are in the template, but not generally turned on. Okay, they need to be turned on and so available to you, turned on, and set to yes in order to be able to use them. Okay. Now, note that this is talking about participants' ability, right? Not for you to necessarily create, but for the suppliers to create alternative options or create bundles and tiers for you. Okay. Some of these functions, bundles, tiers, not very frequently used. Alternate responses, sometimes used, but not the most frequent feature. But that's why this is an advanced session and not the generic session. Now, note, alternate responses and alternate pricing, two separate things, okay? Just like RFI and RFP are two separate things, responses and pricing in this case represent the same kind of difference. Responses is answers to questions, right? If we're talking about, in the content, we're creating different sections, different questions. They need to provide us with X, Y, and Z data, answer yes, no questions, upload a file. Those are responses. Create alternate pricing is different in that pricing refers to line items, lots, term information, okay? If you want them to be able to change both, you need to have both of them selected to yes. Just saying responses does not include items and lots, okay? So if you had it set to no here, you would definitely not be able to create items and lots. Or the supplier would not be able to create alternative pricing in items and lots, okay? Now, as we talk about alternative pricing and alternate responses, one thing to know is that the system has a requirement whereby it makes the supplier submit an initial response based on your basic setup of the event, okay? So they have to create a response that complies with the information you provide to them, and then they have the option to give you a secondary response which differs from the scenario that you give them, okay? And as I'm creating content, I'll show you a little bit about what this might mean and how this might be set up. When you say, can the participant create bundles and tiers, you're enabling for the supplier to give you different combinations, in case of bundles, of items, and say, if you give me or award to me, the supplier, items 1, 2, and 5, I can give you a special price of X, okay? When I say can participants create tiers, they're saying if you award me 1 through 50, it's this price. If you award 51 through 100, it's this price. Anything above 100 is going to be that price, okay? Those are your tiers, just to clearly differentiate on what we're talking about here, okay? Now, we need to enable it here in the rules, but we also need to enable the components in the actual content on what they're able to create alternative responses on, okay? So if I go into my content, and I'm actually just going to quickly add in some content here from an Excel spreadsheet. Okay. Cancel that. All I want to put in is content, not the participant information. we go. So this is just a demonstration content that we have put together just to have some background in here, some actual context in here, okay? If I go into, and we've set up various different questions, right? And these are the responses, right? So if I look at the supplier's questionnaire, these would be the responses where alternate responses might be enabled. And then if we look at pricing, these are the pricing components where pricing alternatives might be enabled, okay? In order to enable that, though, and if I look at this from a pricing perspective, we'll focus on that for a moment first. Okay, this is just a section, no relevance as far as making it available in alternatives. However, if we get into the items, we need to go ahead and edit the item. Okay. And if we look at the item, we would go to edit. And they would be able to change information, but we wouldn't look at the terms. We can set it up so that where did this go? Why is this not set up the way I wanted it to be? If I add a term, for example, a new term, you see here is term editable in alternatives, okay? So I can set up currently in this template configuration a term where they can make changes in the alternatives, okay? Now, one thing we see, and I've exited out of here so that we can click on price, and that would be a term that would need to be editable in alternatives. However, as we can see in this template, it's not actually set up to do that, which I did not double check. So I do apologize. So as you can see, some of this depends on the setup. The other thing is, if you look at the supplier, okay, currently it's owner required. However, I have the option to change it to be participant required, okay, meaning that the supplier could give me a different quantity as well. I could require the supplier to give me a quantity. But for now, what I actually need to do is I need to return to my template and modify my template, okay? And this will give you a view, if you're the event administrator, of what needs to be done. So if I go to content, go to the definitions of my item template, go to my price, okay, here is the term eligible in alternative, editable by owner and participants set up. It's not shown to be visible, but it is editable, okay. If I select an additional item or a term, then I can control that. In this case, this template has been pre-configured that it is already editable, but you'll see there's multiple options: not editable, owner only, and by owner and participant. Now, can participant edit terms primary response? Okay, meaning primary response is the one that I talked about, where they have to submit based on my requirements first. Okay. Now, if we go back to our event, and again, if I look at And right here, I need to click these, delegate to initiator, to be able to change this within my actual event. Okay? Now, I can bring in, I can set up quantity as well. Right now, it's owner required, but see, this is where I would change it to participant required. If I don't know what the quantities are, but I want the supplier to tell me how many they can deliver to me, I can make it participant required, okay? Just to let you know some more advanced features. But again, you will see is the term editable in alternatives, right? So I could let the supplier change the quantities, okay, in an alternate. I can say they can't change the primary response because I want them to quote me on the number that I want, but if I make it editable in alternatives, that means that they can change it the second time around and say, actually, you know, I require 25, but if you give me 100, I can give you a better price, right? Or you require 25, but actually my best price to provide you with these is 20 because that's the way the pack comes, then they can give you a better price for that. But as you can see, the template requires some manipulation so that it's actually editable, okay? And this checkbox means that I can edit this whilst I'm in my live event. These were not checked, so I was not able to edit them in my live event, okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and click on Done, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually publish this. Now, new version is what I clicked enable to be able to edit this. Now I'm going to go back to click on Publish and make this available to me. Now, because I made changes to the actual template, that means that I have to create a new event. These changes will not be carried forward. I have to start with a new event. I could theoretically import some of the information that I've set up, but actually I need to go ahead and create a new event. So bear with me for 1 second. And I'll make this my number 2. Same template, right? Because this is going to by default show me the most up-to-date version of the template. It's not going to tell me which version it is, but by default, because I just published it, it's giving me the most up-to-date version. I'm going to go ahead and click on Create. Again, this hasn't really changed because we didn't change any formats. We're going to keep all of these as yet. I'm going to go ahead and go to our content. I'm going to, again, take a moment to bring in my template with the content. And I could import this from a library too if I had it in the library. This just happens to be in the Excel format. Okay, if I go back to my desktop computer now, I should have the option to now change this. Now, okay, the reason I may not is because this is pulled in from a template. So, let's go ahead and change this. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away the pricing section entirely and create my own, okay? Because to note is if this is in a template, the template that I pull in can sometimes take precedence over the items that were in my template before, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to create a new section. It's going to be after section 5, pricing. Say OK. And to that section, I'm going to add a line item. Okay, and this can be in my computer. If I go into price now, having brought this in, may have messed up this settings. Let me just check this right here. Okay, so this has changed to be response required, owner required, participant required. Okay, so the changes we made have taken place because that was not previously available. Okay, I couldn't select one or the other. I'm going to leave it as owner required, but I do have the question, is term editable in alternatives available? And I can say yes, participant can change it. And then by default, as I said earlier, the edit primary response is set to no. Okay. Now, if I save that, I can put in an initial value, and I have to put in a value because it's a required, right? So I can put in a value of 25, for example, and it's required. Okay. Now, price is a special field in that it doesn't always show everything. Okay. We have set it up to be editable, so it will be, but it's not necessarily showing this at this point. We can't change it here right now. Now, let's go ahead and name this and say this is our item number 1. Okay. Then I can add my second item number 2. And if I go into my quantity, you'll see that it's already, it's mirrored the format of the first item that I created. Okay. So it's assuming that I want to do the same thing again. Okay. Again, it's going to give me an error because it wants the quantity, so I'll just say 50 for now. Okay. Now, this one I'll call my laptop, for example. As I said, I could add a term a new term with any other requirements I have and decide whether or not this is collecting, for example, another money factor, and whether or not suppliers can edit this or not. Okay. Once I select that they can edit it or not, I can decide whether or not they can change it in the primary response. Okay. And it could be we're requiring, for example, a shipping cost. Okay. And I can put in an initial value. And I'll put an initial value of 100. Okay, so we have 2 items so far. I'm going to add a couple more. Now this one has a shipping cost, the other one does not, okay, just because I added it here as an example. I will add another line item, and this can be a printer. I'm not going to change, I'm not going to add an additional term. I don't have to change anything on the quantity because we already know that it's been set up. I'm going to say I want 20 printers, okay? And then I can just go ahead and say I want to add another line item, which is, for example, going to be keyboards, okay? Now, I've added this. Again, all I need to do here is put in my quantity. Let's say we'll do 100 so that we have some spare. I'm done. I've got 4 items to start with, okay? Now, I'm going to add a test supplier just so you can see what it looks like from a supplier perspective. Best practice recommendation here is that everybody who works in the system should have a test supplier set up so that they can run tests and so that they can see the process that suppliers experience as well in order to go ahead and submit bids and to test out certain scenarios. Okay, so I have my test supplier in here. And actually, let's invite another one. Okay, we have two suppliers in. We have our content. Now, we talked about the pricing. Let's look at it from a question perspective. If I look in the questions, there's nothing I need to do here, okay? This is just generally looking at all we need to do is enable the question. So if I look, even if I look at different question types, this is put in. I don't have to say that it's editable in alternatives, okay? Because it's assuming that the answer is going to be given, and then I can give a secondary answer if I need to, okay? If I go to Actions and View as Participant, okay, they will see that they need to provide information to the question, answers to the questions, etc. Right? These are all my questions. Here are my items, shipping costs, etc. This is what I need to do. Okay. Now, I can't actually demonstrate in the preview how the alternate response is going to work. Okay, because you can't actually submit a response. There are detailed instructions available for suppliers to see what they need to do to create an alternate response. So I'm not going to actually publish this and show this to you, but I've set it up and showed you the setup. So what I would recommend to do is, if you want to see this, practice with a test supplier and see that they have to submit it. Once they submit their primary response, they will be prompted with the option, and I'll show you where it's going to show up right up here, to submit an alternate response. Okay, and it will guide them through the steps of what they want to do. But because we've also set up bundling and tiers, it will ask them what they want to do. Okay, and they will be prompted here to submit a secondary response. Then they will have buttons on the bottom here that will guide them through what type of alternate response they're trying to provide, whether it's just an alternate price or whether it's a bundle or a tier. Okay. Now, to set up additional complexity features that we talked about, let's move on to look at making things conditional. Okay. If I want to say, in my questionnaire, I have a section here or a question here that is conditional based on another question. Okay. Okay. So, for example, I have a question here. Both of those questions need to be created that I want to use for the condition. If I say I want to create a condition, I'm going to edit my question, and then I have the option to create visibility conditions. Okay. Now, before I go any further on this, visibility conditions are only available for questions and sections with questions in them. You cannot make items or lots conditional. Okay? Only for questions and only for sections that have questions in them. If you have a section in it that contains questions and items or questions and lots, it will error out on you. It will not work. Okay? Just wanted to throw that in there before you get into any kind of thoughts on complexities of setting up items. Will not work. Now, visibility conditions. I can click on, so we're approaching this right now from a question perspective, okay? You can also have this visibility condition on a section perspective. But for now, both of my questions are built. I'm going to say I'm going to create a condition. When I click to create a condition, it shows me all of the other questions that are available upon which I can base these conditions, okay? It will only show me questions that have something that are of a question type that can be answered by the system, that can be read by the system, right? The system needs to have a predefined value that it can read in order to set the condition, right? For example, if we wanted to base it on the location, like we just mentioned, I need to know my location that I want to reference here, okay? So the expression basically says, for this question, if somebody says, okay, this is the answer, then I can use that. If I say I want to use the next question, when can you begin servicing our company, it's giving me the drop-downs that I gave. So if I say I want this question to be answered only if somebody says this week, then I click on OK, right? And it's defining what is this week, right? And says OK. And I say OK. And it tells me what the visibility condition is. Okay, when can you begin serving a customer? From this week, okay? And if I say done, and if I look, this is the question that we're basing it on, okay? Now, if I go and view it as a participant, and go to my section 5, I currently don't see this question, okay? It's not going to show up unless I select a date within the correct date line. Now it's there because I selected a date within this week's date range, okay? If I were to remove that information again, and update, the question disappears, okay? So the system is basing the availability of the question on the date provided, okay? And I could use yes, no answers, any of these, okay? That was question to question. If I end the preview here, I can also say the same thing can apply to a section, okay? So for example, I could add, okay, let's say they accept the agreement terms and conditions. Only if they accept are they going to get the supplier's questionnaire available to them. So I would go in and edit. Visibility condition, visible to participant generally, yes. However, I'm going to create a condition, okay? Do you accept these conditions is my question. And my condition is now only if they say yes, will they see this section, okay? Pretty straightforward setup, okay? Now, if I go back into view as a participant, right now, if I review everything, it skips completely over section 5, not visible, okay? Until I go into the do you accept this conditions portion, which is actually something that we review accept in the prerequisites. So if I change the answer in the prerequisites, because it's a gate condition, that's why, okay? If I set this to yes, okay, and say done, now if I scroll through, okay, it may not show this. Yes, done. Because we're not in a live environment, it's not going to show it. But basically, as soon as that's accepted and the gate condition is accepted and sent back to us, it will work. Now, but if you have set this gate up, for example, okay, which it could be one thing that's hindering us from seeing the actual answer, okay, if you were, okay, right now it's yes with an access gate on event content, right? Because it's a prerequisite question. Right now it's not, we wouldn't see, I can't see the change for it because it's not actually submitting the information, so it's not actually changing anything because we're looking at a preview, right? But it also, if in the case where you said only review responses before that, and if this was set to yes, then you would have to go in and prove that they've seen it, and then they'd be able to see the questions, okay? So you can get as complex as you want to with the setup of some of this visibility, okay? I'm going to go ahead and click on Done here, and move on to show you a couple of extra features within item setup, okay? I've had a view. There's not been any questions at this point. If you do have any questions on any specific scenarios that you'd like to potentially cover, do let me know. But I want to show you how to work with formulas as well, if this is not something that you've done before, and how you can change formulas, okay, and how formulas can affect pricing. So right now, if I go into Edit, okay, in this template, I've enabled it so that formulas can be changed. Generally, if you go into Extended Price, you just see that there's a formula here. You can't change that, right? You can't change what the impact of Extended Price is, okay? But theoretically, now that I've changed it to be editable, Extended Price doesn't have to be price times quantity. Okay, it could be I add another factor either by creating another term, right? Depending on what these questions might be, right? I could, it's showing me all of the, basically it's showing me all of the components that are available to manipulate this formula, okay? Right now, price, quantity are the only ones that are price related. But because my reject rate is a numeric value, it could also be in form of a percentage, right? It could be used within my formula. So if I wanted to ask a question like this and have it affect my pricing, I can set it up to do so, okay? So basic system formulas are in here. Generally not modifiable unless you set them up that, yes, formulas can be created, and then the delegated feature was turned on here as well, okay? Same goes for savings, okay? There's a standard formula for savings, which is basically savings is based on extended price, okay? But what if I have another feature in here that affects the extended price? Or what if I have an additional historic price that I want to add and want to base it on that, okay? These are things that I can add, right? What if I want to base it on the savings on a historic quantity and not on the current quantity, right? These are examples of when you might want to change the savings formula. Right now I can see the savings formula. If I click on savings, I can actually change the formula. Okay, now note, these formulas, when they say savings and they have, this is a system generated formula, but general Excel formulas work in here too. Other thing to note is, you see this alias, extended price, that's what's matched here. If I wanted the savings to be based on price and not on the extended price, because I wanted to see the savings per piece and not by the multiplied quantity, right? Then I could change this here to just be price, okay? So I can change this. So if you look, there's the brackets around this. If I remove that and I were to insert price, it automatically puts it here, okay, by default. It doesn't put it where I have my cursor, but I can move it to where I have my cursor, okay? Now if I click on validate, tell me the validation was successful, and actually I've changed the formula, I can test this, quote unquote, by saying, okay, say my initial price is 10, my historic price was 20, okay. If I ask the system to update totals, we can see that the savings is showing me the differential between these two, not between these two, okay? Originally, it would have shown me the differential between the extended price, historic, and initial. Now it's based on showing me the historic price between ceiling and historic, okay? So these are features that are advanced features in that you have to know that you can change it and you have to know how to change it, right? Something that comes up occasionally, not something that's an everyday question, but definitely something that I have found through the years of working with the tool is useful to know. You can also create a formula from scratch. Okay, so say I'm going to add a term, and my term is going to be completely different. I'm going to add an imaging fee, okay, onto here. And I'm not going to make it automatically include in cost. I want it to be something that I just create a specific formula for, okay? And I can say this is going to be money, and it's going to be participant required, and I'm not going to change anything specific here. I want it, for the supplier, I want it to show up in a column. Does it have a historic value? No, it does not. No, it's not going to be editable in apprenticeship, etc. Okay. I have my fee, okay? Now what I can do is I can create a formula and I can name it whatever I want it to be, right? So I could say it's not necessarily the extended price. It's not my price per item, right? I'm going to say that the imaging fee is something that's going to happen per item, okay? So I'd like to know the extended price, but maybe I'd like to know the extended imaging fee, right? How much is that going to be for each? So I can say, okay, take this fee, multiply it by my quantity, and that's going to be my extended imaging fee. Validation successful. And I'm going to say, okay. And now, one thing also to note. Right now, it's going to show it to the participant. I may not want the supplier to necessarily see that, right? If I had any other formula pieces going on in here, okay? So I could make this something that's only necessary for me to see, okay? Again, I have the decision on whether I can show it in a column or a row. I'm going to leave this as row and then show you a preview of what the supplier will see, just so that you can get an idea of what it's going to do. So this is my own created formula. And if I do a calculation here, I'd say, okay, the imaging fee, and I mean, these are just simple numbers, but the imaging fee, for example, is going to be $50 per computer that I've created, right? And I update the totals. It's going to say, okay, 50 times 25 equals your imaging fee is $1,250, okay? Now, I might say, okay, that's good, that's what I wanted. If I use the total cost template, I could create something similar, right? But if I say, I want to use the extended price, and I don't want it to be price times quantity. I want it actually to be price times quantity, right? Which is my extended price, but I also want to add in the imaging fee. Okay, so I have a more total cost overview. I click validate, check that system like that. Now if I look at my update, it's going to show me the calculation. And I can, of course, move this around so that it flows in a more sequential order, okay, if I prefer this more sequential order. Right now the savings is on a per price basis, right? And here I am, I've manipulated my terms to be exactly what I need them to be. And I'm done. If I look at it from a supplier point of view, let me actually go quick. I'm only selecting pricing here right now from a supplier point of view. And I can see the extended imaging fee was left as a row, so it shows up here, whereas the imaging fee was selected as a column, so it shows up here. Okay, so that's just how am I setting them up for the supplier to see. So, for example, if I wanted to create a table for the supplier to enter various pricing components, I would make sure that these new terms that I'm adding are selected as columns. Okay. Sometimes people ask, does it make sense to create a table section? And is that classified as an advanced feature? It's a complex feature. The key thing to note about table sections, when you create these sections, information entered by the supplier is not compared to information entered by another supplier. Okay? So it's a standalone one-piece component, and from a supplier point of view, they have to click on it and it opens up a separate window. It doesn't flow within the actual response, okay? So it's there, it's functional, it's viable. Is it recommended from a best practice perspective? Not really, okay? Because it's basically creating an Excel spreadsheet within the system. That doesn't do very much other than present the supplier with boxes. Okay, that's it's a little bit more than a personal opinion in that from a best practice point of view, if you want all of this to flow together, don't necessarily use that table section. Okay. Then one other advanced feature to show, which is related to, and I'm going to leave the RFP for now and go into some of the create template options. Okay, I'm going to save and exit out of here. And if I choose RFP, right, I have total cost, percentage bidding, price breakdown. These are some of the additional templates that are not standard templates within the system, okay? We could dedicate another hour or two to cover some of these different template formats. The main difference between these templates is, of course, the fact that they affect the pricing method, okay? How do the line items and lots function? One other thing to note, some of the formulas, some of the manipulations that I just did are predefined in something like price breakdown and total cost because they're looking at it from two different perspectives, okay? Price breakdown is saying you're rolling up components into one thing that is the price. Total cost is saying you have your price times quantity, and that's fine, but you have extra components that you're adding onto it, maybe just one, maybe two, that are not on a, that don't need to be multiplied by the price, but do need to be added to the total cost of either my line item or my lot. Okay, so that's the difference between here. Custom offline response sheet, again, is a little bit more of an involved session that we'll be doing in the near future, where you set up offline content for the supplier to complete that is then reflected in the system. The supplier basically never enters, if you don't wish them to, never enters any information into Ariba as such, but uses an Excel format that you dictate. Okay? That's what the custom offline sheet represents. Again, this is a feature. The reason we have a separate template for it is the template-enabled features, not a feature that's automatically enabled. We do have a session on templates that will talk through some of this as well if you wanted to watch the separate webinar for that. very quickly, I'm going to go to an auction feature that is an advanced feature, which is the reverse auction with bid transformation. Okay, that is you adding factors to an auction where the supplier doesn't see the factors that you're adding. It's giving them preference, or it's quote unquote penalizing them. But you know what you're doing, but they can't see it. So, for example, if you had switching costs, you might use something like a reverse auction with bid transformation. Okay. So I'm just quickly going to create this. It won't take long to show you what it does. Okay, there's a test. And I've selected my template. Okay, so from an auction perspective, it's set up very much like any other generic auction. We have a webinar out there as well on best practices, tactics for setting up auctions. If we go into the content and I create a line item, for example, and say this is my computer, and it gives me the option of using total cost and unit cost, okay? But it's set up to have transformation in there as well, in that if I create a term, okay, and I can do it the discount amount or percentage, okay? So say I say a discount amount, okay? So if I want to use an actual amount that I put in there for the supplier, this is a supplier required item, okay? But really what I want, if I add the term, and I make this, say, an adder, suddenly you see all the supplier-related features disappear because it's not visible to the supplier. It's not required by the supplier. It's nothing to do with the supplier. It affects the supplier's pricing, and I can decide whether it's on a per-unit basis or on an overall basis, okay? And I'll say, let's say it's an overall basis. And I can decide whether it's money, right? Or I could make it a percentage. Okay, so if I want to penalize them with money and make it an adder, I can say this is my switching cost, okay? So if I define that to be a specific amount, I can say, well, two things. I can make it a generic across all suppliers, right? I haven't added any suppliers to this event, so I can actually just save this for the moment, okay? And this just shows up as switching cost, okay? I can move it up to where I want to see it. I'm going to, it needs me to put in an actual quantity. And I need to put in some bid decrements. Let's say 10, 5, and 5. Okay. And say done. Oh, one more. And actually, I don't actually need this part. Okay, let's provide a historical value of 100. Again, in some templates you can turn this off so it's not required, but that wasn't done yet here. So add a quick supplier for my test. And let's add, this one. Say OK. Now, if I go to my content, go back to my switching, it says specific initial values for the supplier, okay? So it's expecting me to set up switching costs on a per supplier basis. For this supplier, I might say it's 0. For this supplier, because they're new and unknown to me, it might be $500 or $5,000, whatever I determine it to be, okay? So I've now set it up per supplier rather than overall. If I look at it from a supplier, and again, I did not set these up as columns versus row. That's entirely up to you, right? The discount amount would be something that would be expected to be filled in by the supplier. The switching cost, as you'll see, something that we determine and only we see. You see how that discount amount is here, but the switching cost is nowhere visible to the supplier, okay? Now, what it's going to do is it's going to show to the supplier their rank or their price based on the amount that you've defined. And if they're in first place rank, then it'll show them that they have to not only go down by whatever the bid decrement is, but they have to go down by an additional $500 to improve their rank, okay? For suppliers trying to beat them, if we were to make it something where, for example, the other suppliers put it in its advantage, so it's not a switching cost, but rather we're giving the supplier that we already know the advantage of being our primary supplier, right? What they would see is, what the other suppliers would see is that they need to beat the lead bid by an additional $500, even though that my primary supplier's bid is $500 higher, okay? So you're basically changing how the ranking is viewed and changing what the system is showing to the suppliers without actually telling them. And the system is intelligent enough to know that it goes in both directions, right? So that's what the transformation is referring to. But it's only available in the transformation template because, as you see, it has to, the term has to be set up to make sure that the adder, as soon as you click adder, right, it turns it into something the supplier doesn't see. Not all templates are set up to do that. You can add additional terms. You can say adder, but it will not make it a transformation event because that transformation feature needs to be turned on, okay? This template is set up so that the transformation feature is turned on. Trying to combine too many features, transformation with this, that, and formulas, et cetera, can lead down a tricky road, so I would recommend to consult with somebody from the Best Practice Center or the help desk to make sure that technically it's going to work and that you don't, quote unquote, mess up your template settings. Okay, we're 2 minutes over. Either you haven't heard me at all or you have no questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So please feel free to ask any questions via the chat or the Q&A feature. Otherwise, thank you for your time today. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to talk to your CEE, your account representative, about some of these questions, and even request some Best Practice Center time that can be available at some points. And that is that. You'll be prompted with a little survey. We would appreciate if you could complete that. But that is it for the moment.